Is it another giant conflict of interest for Mark Carney or just plain unethical meddling? Either way, Mark Carney is meddling in Eurovision and meddling in CBC programming, which is in fact against the rules. Yes, Eurovision. This is what the whole debate is about, but it is more conflict of interest for Mark Carney. If the CBC is supposed to be independent from government, despite its funding, why is the Liberal federal government allowed to be announcing its entertainment programming? And here's something funny. The CBC said it couldn't afford to participate in Eurovision. But then the budget actually mentions Eurovision and more funding for CBC. The federal budget specifically referenced Canada's participation in Eurovision. You can look that up. The government then increased CBC's funding by $150 million after they said, we can't afford to be in Eurovision, but now we're suddenly in Eurovision. How'd that happen? Internal government documents reportedly warned ministers that they are not supposed to direct CBC programming under the Canadian Broadcasting Act. But then, the Prime Minister proudly announced Canada's participation as though it were another government initiative. We made this happen. We're in Eurovision. Maybe everything about this was perfectly legal from a legalese standpoint, but if Canadians are supposed to believe the CBC operates independently from the government, shouldn't that line be very, very clear here? Because right now, it looks as blurry as ever. Let's tap into the truth.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
Welcome back to your Saturday morning edition of Tap the Maple. Happy long weekend for you, everybody. Don't forget to like, subscribe, join the conversation. On Canada Day, Prime Minister Mark Carney enthusiastically announced that Canada would be entering the Eurovision Song Contest in 2027. If you've never watched Eurovision, imagine one of the biggest television music competitions in the world. It's like American Idol on steroids. Huge productions, massive audiences watching from all over Europe, an enormous cultural event across the European continent that a lot of people participate in. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Canadians enjoying Eurovision. If it's something you like, go for it. Not my cup of tea or coffee. But this episode isn't about the contest itself. It's about something much, much bigger. And that is, it's about who gets to decide what Canada's public broadcaster, the CBC, does, since you're not supposed to meddle in it. Because according to our laws, in fact, that isn't supposed to be politicians at all. Meaning, keep your hands out of it, Mark. But he's not keeping his hands out of it, and it's probably all under lock and key like Canada's finances, and he hopes you'll never notice. But let's walk through what we know. First of all, one of the things we know is that the CBC had previously explored participating in Eurovision. We know that. Before Mark Carney. And according to documents obtained by the National Post through the Access to Information request, the corporation concluded participation in Eurovision would require additional funding because of the significant cost. This was pre-2026 budget. Estimates reportedly range from hundreds of thousands of dollars to roughly $1.5 million, depending on the production of the whole thing. And at that point, they decided, no Eurovision. We just can't do it. We don't have the funding for it. Can't do it. Can't happen. Then comes the federal budget this year. The same budget that increased CBC's funding by $150 million. And buried within that budget was something rather unusual for a fiscal budget. The government specifically stated that it would work with CBC and Radio Canada to explore Canada's participation in, guess what? Eurovision. Think about that for a second. A budget, including that information. Budgets normally talk about numbers, don't they? Am I wrong here? They talk about funding. Budgets normally talk about policy to some degree. Budgets normally don't mention individual television productions or programming initiatives from across the pond. That alone raises some questions here, doesn't it? Why was this in the budget in the first place? What are you doing including Eurovision in the Canadian budget? Something smells Carney here. Now, here's the part that really caught my attention, and it's worse than even the fact that you're not supposed to meddle with the CBC. Internal Heritage Canada documents reportedly had to remind officials of something that shouldn't need reminding. Under the Canadian Broadcasting Act, the government does not direct and cannot direct CBC programming despite providing the funding. That principle exists for a reason. Regardless of which party forms government, they can't meddle in the programming. Whether it's Liberals, whether it's Conservatives, NDP, even if the Greens ever end up in leadership. That's a good one, right? Anyone, though, anyone at all, cannot meddle in the programming. If politicians start deciding what appears on a public broadcaster, which we all know is probably actually happening anyway, it stops being independent, which, again, I don't think we can call the CBC independent. But that's precisely what the rules state. So that's the facts. So why were public officials discussing Eurovision? Well, they know that they're already meddling in the CBC anyway. But it is a question Canadians deserve answered. You're obviously pushing your agenda through the CBC even though you shouldn't. Why not add another thing to it? Might as well just throw Eurovision in it. And even though it's unheard of to put that in a budget, you're Mark Carney. Sometimes people hear CBC independence and immediately think of journalism, which is really not true anymore. They think of just nonpartisan news coverage, political interviews, if you're in the liberal world, editorial decisions, but whatever. Independence goes much further than that. It should. You should not be having and singing the praises of Mark Carney ever. We know that. But the programming decisions matter here too. Entertainment matters. Documentaries matter. Special events matter. If they're getting involved in all of that, also on top of pushing their agenda and the hate for Pierre Poilievre, then this is just a liberal public broadcaster. The appearance of independence has completely eroded from the CBC. It's already done that through the election and even before that, but now it's just like to a point where it's extreme. Public confidence depends not only on actual independence, though, it depends on visible independence itself. And other than liberals believing everything out of the mouths of the CBC reporters, it is not independent at all. And that's where this story becomes even more important, because now it feels like they're going to start to branch this out to other networks, doesn't it? Provide a little funding, provide the instructions. Let's imagine the exact same sequence happened under a conservative government, by the way. The government increases CBC funding, and then Pierre Poilievre somehow gets his hands in there and starts dictating the programming. His federal budget announces a specific television initiative. The Prime Minister later celebrates the initiative in a major public speech. And they start singing all the praises and bashing all the Mark Carneys. And if it had flipped the other way, the Liberals would be going insane. Commentators would not sit there going, nothing to see here on other networks. Not at all. Not if it's conservative. The concern would immediately become government influence because it's conservative over an independent broadcaster. What are you doing? You're breaking the rules. The standard shouldn't change depending on which party occupies the Prime Minister's office, but in Canada it does. And that's why we need more independent reviewers on this. Independence should matter for a publicly funded broadcaster, essentially. That's just it. It's not going to happen. I understand that. You don't need to put that in the comments. I get it. We're not going to see that happen with CBC. But here's where precision matters. There is currently no public evidence proving that Mark Carney actually ordered the CBC to participate, but putting it in the budget is absolutely insane. It suggests that you essentially said to CBC, oh, you can't afford it? Here you go. That is, though, what you're going to do. And CBC claims its decision was its own entirely. You know, just like when it fact checks and it does all of this combating of misinformation. Okay, right. Even though you're the home of misinformation, right? Yeah. Anyway, why was Eurovision specifically referenced in the federal budget? That's the real question here. If you don't meddle with things, if you don't have a conflict of interest, what's going on? Because heritage officials actually did say you can't meddle with the Broadcasting Act. So why had CBC previously concluded participation required additional funding, and ta-da, there it is? And why are taxpayers still being told that CBC's own cost estimates are confidential? Because the CBC won't share what it was going to cost to participate in this. That's a huge question as well, but it's probably part of what we talked about a couple of days ago when we said that Mark Carney is just not disclosing anything about this country's finances, keeping it all under lock and key, even despite economists being very concerned about that. The CBC receives billions, everybody, like billions, and that creates obligations, or it should, It should not just produce programming that's independent. It should be reporting back to us. It has to earn our public trust. Trust comes from transparency, as we know, and Mark Carney has a giant trust deficit right now. But here's the thing. We should generally know what it costs to participate in Eurovision and decide for ourselves whether that's truly something an independent broadcaster for this country should participate in or pay for with our money. Keeping cost estimates hidden while asking taxpayers to simply trust the process doesn't strengthen our confidence in you, Mark. It weakens it further and further and further. I mean, this is happening daily now. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the trust deficit. Then we talked about the hiding of the budget, increasing the trust deficit. And now here we are with the meddling around Eurovision. Eurovision is just an example of the trust deficit this Mark Carney prime ministerial reign is creating. And independent public institutions are beginning to also ask, what the hell is going on here? There should be boundaries with independent public institutions, boundaries that exist. The rules have to survive regardless of who wins the next election, and I don't care if you claim to be the world's greatest economist. Once those lines start to blur, then they blur for everybody after you. It becomes much easier for future governments to push them even further. And that's why it matters to follow the rules no matter who you are or how powerful you think you might be. Not because of a singing competition, but because of the principle behind what you're doing here. And it violates the rules that are clearly in place and have been for decades around broadcasting, and especially a public broadcaster. Maybe everything here was technically permissible by law. Nobody is going to jail over any of this. Maybe every decision followed every rule to a certain extent. But that's not the only standard Canadians should be caring about here. Trust is a big issue. Public institutions don't just need to be independent, they need to look independent, and they need to be transparent about what things cost them. When governments announce programming initiatives for that network and then hide the cost of that programming initiative, something's really wrong. When budgets reference specific entertainment programs, something's really wrong. When internal officials are reminding or having to remind ministers about limits contained in a broadcasting act they should know very well, something is very wrong. It is reasonable to ask whether those boundaries are becoming harder to see. That's not an attack on Eurovision. I'm sure there are people in this country that love it, that originated in Europe and watch it all the time. It's not even an attack on music, and it's not even an attack per se on the CBC itself. We've already done enough of that. But it is a call for something every Canadian should support, and that is clear lines, transparency, consistency in transparency, and rebuilding trust with this government, which I don't think is ever coming. Independent public institutions must be away from the government, because once those lines disappear, getting them back is never easy. That's how you tap into the truth. Don't forget to like, subscribe, get into this conversation down below. Are you worried at all about this? I mean, it seems like your conversations and your comments from the last episodes on Mark Carney's trust deficit are saying you've got concerns. I mean, obviously conservatives do, but I'm starting to see the center move into having some concerns here as well. If you were a non-voter of Pierre Poilievre and conservatives, and you are somewhere in the middle and you're starting to wane on your trust, would love to know that in the comments down below. We'd love to have a conversation with you about it, about anything with anybody, of course, because this is your community after all. Thanks for living and listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning, Sunday, for the Sunday morning edition of Tap the Maple. There will not be an episode on Holiday Monday because I'm going to actually just not do it. That's what we're going to do. We're just not going to do one on Holiday Monday, and you're probably going to be out and about anyway with family and friends. Enjoy your long weekend. Be safe. Thanks for living and listening, and we will see you tomorrow.